You're listening to Package Your Genius, a conversation designed to give you clarity on your calling and serve as a catalyst for your career. I'm your host, Amanda Miller Littlejohn. Welcome back, you guys, to another episode of Package Your Genius. I don't know where you live in the world, but I live in Washington, D.C., and for the last couple of days, we have been snowed in, which has been surprisingly fun. I took the time to build a snowman that ended up looking more like a turtle with one of my kids, and I made a big pot of chili and really spent the weekend reading and writing and thinking and kind of spending time with the family. So that's been nice, but I'm excited for the thaw that is coming soon. I wanted to continue our focus on focus because it's the beginning of the year and so many of us are figuring out who will be this year and what we'll make of the next 12 months. And as we talked about on the last episode with Kimberly Boyd Lewis, one of the things that we can do to really optimize our time and our days is to remove unnecessary decisions by advanced planning for so many of the things we know are going to come up for us. So that's scheduling or pre-scheduling vacations and pre-scheduling doctor's appointments and thinking about the gifts you want to give to the people who are important in your life and getting that on your calendar or setting up a budget for it. But another thing I want us to focus on is not only what decisions will we remove by planning and scheduling, but what will we prioritize this year because we know that it's key and important to us feeling good and living our best lives. And so I wanted to share a personal story about how I identified a priority that I have not been making enough room for and what that taught me, and a couple of tips that I want to share with you to help you potentially find your priority and make it count. So, I've kept a journal, and I've talked about this before on the podcast, but I have kept a journal, a written journal, pretty consistently since I was a child, and especially during college. I remember in college, I would sometimes journal multiple times each day. So it was a practice that was very important to me. And it was a self-care practice, but it was also a tool for me to just work through my thoughts and my feelings and process whatever was going on with me. And more recently, I think from 2013 to 2016, I journaled almost daily, so pretty religiously. I'd found this perfect journal that I liked. So it was a journal by Kate Spade, and I remember ordering it, and I loved the paper, I loved the lines, I liked how the book felt, I liked the size of the book, and it was just a perfect journal for me. And I had been journaling at this point for 2 decades, and this is like the perfect book. And I'm like, yes, the holy grail. So I remember ordering 4 of these journals, and I would use the journal for a full year. Well, when it came time for me to re-up and order more journals, found out that the journal had been discontinued. So this amazing journal that, I loved, was no longer being made. And just to give you an idea of the type of things that I was writing about in that journal, at the time my children were a little younger than they are now, obviously. So I was writing about being a mom and what was coming up for me in terms of being a creative mom. So, having all of these creative urges and ideas I wanted to pursue while also balancing the responsibility of being a mom and being a wife. And it was also a place where I would work out and discover some of the larger themes that have really informed the work I'm doing today with my clients and with my academy. So I would write about the different insights and aha moments I was having with clients, my goals for them, my goals for me, events I wanted to do, special content projects I wanted to create. I would consistently be recalibrating around, am I working in my purpose? Am I doing the work that energizes me? What about it does energize me? What about it doesn't? And I was always fine tuning and figuring out kind of my recipe for doing my very best work. I was writing and working through what motivated me. And eventually I realized that a lot of the things I had journaled, a lot of those journal entries were really just notes for, the books that I'm writing. So the one book that came out, and I have another one that is honestly almost finished. Notes for podcast episode, etc. So I was using journaling to work through my thoughts, process complex feelings, and just hold myself to my goals. It helped me to see my own patterns and to remember key moments. But then, as I said, Kate Spade discontinued this amazing journal. And I had this ritual where on January 1st, I would make a cup of coffee, I would sit down, and I would have like my first journaling entry, journaling session of the year. And I would, really spend a couple of hours just thinking and reflecting. And that first journal entry of the year was really important for me to just start this process. It's almost like a ritual to start the year off in a positive way and holding myself accountable. It was something I was proud to do regularly, so it was really important. And so I remember that first year after the journal had been discontinued and I didn't have a new one, I really didn't know where to put all of my thoughts, feelings, etc. And I tried a couple of other journals but didn't like them. And for whatever reason, just couldn't get it together. I couldn't find a suitable replacement for the Kate Spade book. And so then journaling just kind of fell by the wayside. I wasn't consistent anymore. I would journal a little bit in one book and then I'd say, well, let me try this one out. And I think the fact of having that one space and one book I was coming back to every day was a big part of the process. So it didn't happen overnight, but slowly and surely things really did begin to change. And I started to notice the impact of, or the lost impact rather, of what journaling had done for me, that it was, no longer there. So, for example, I used to have these really lucid moments of inspiration and insight. And I would write these short, maybe like two or 300 words, but they would be these short but powerful posts, and I would put them on social media. And that was a big way that I grew my audience and following initially. And those insights dried up. It was harder for me to make decisions without the journaling, the practice of journaling. It was harder for me to, as I said, build my tribe, because my words and my writing, those were essentially how I connected with people. That was my superpower. And by stopping the regular practice of journaling, I had almost deactivated my superpower, because I lost that connection with myself and my source and the source of the insights that I would go on to share with other people to help them. I mean, obviously, while I was working with clients, it was one thing, it's fine, but the more public facing work that I would share on social media, it was just harder. Those insights didn't come as regularly. And so it was also harder for me to see the themes and patterns of my own life. So I found myself wrestling with key decisions much longer, and anxiety came back. So one of the ways that I process anxiety is through writing, right? So I'll kind of like talk myself down or off of the ledge by writing. And I've had, great therapists and people in my corner who I also talk to, but a go to safe space for me has always been going to the journal. And so, not being able to process and slow myself down when I was in the middle of having an anxious thought, that really showed up in my feelings and mental health. And so, over this past holiday break, I started thinking about journaling and how I missed it. And I made the decision to bring it back, to use a new journal that I have and just to go with it wherever it goes. Even if it's not perfect and it's not exactly the book that I grew to love, it will do for now until I can find a suitable replacement. And maybe this one will be great. I like it. It's leather. The paper's nice. I like it enough. And who knows, maybe it will grow on me. But I made the decision to bring the journaling back because one of the things that I have realized over time that I require is the time and space to think and write daily. So for me to be my best self as a mom, my best self as a coach, my best self as a writer, as a leader of community, as a friend, as a wife, I require daily time to think and to write. So it's a basic requirement for me to be my best self and to operate at my highest functioning self. And so what I want you to think about is, what do you require, right? Like, what is it that you require that helps you feel your best, think your most clearly, be your most creative, be your most loving and caring, right? And once you know what that is, like, are you even meeting your own basic requirements to be your best? It reminds me of a conversation I was having with a Package Your Genius Academy student who was really struggling with how to package herself and her skills in a new way. So she is used to working one way with clients, but she's missing engagement and the energy from having coworkers or having people she sees and touches and can, physically connect with on a daily basis because she works remotely. And so for her, I was encouraging her that if she knows she needs that physical, in-person engagement, if you need the energy of other people, you have to make that a priority for yourself and build it into who you are and how you work, because that is going to help you be your best. We talk about this a lot in the academy overall because a part of the personal branding process, from my perspective, is not just figuring out the work that you can do, but also figuring out the modality. So how is it that you're working, right? Like, when do you feel your best? Who's around you? What's the environment look like? What are the ingredients for your best day? And how can you be intentional about pulling those ingredients together so you can have as many best days as possible? So for you, that might look like, having the social engagement, or maybe you feel your best when you're allowed to be a trusted confidant to your clients, or maybe you feel your best when you're influencing people and inspiring them from the stage. So, like, for example, for me, I don't see myself standing in front of thousands of people in an arena. Like, that doesn't light me up. But what does light me up, and where I do see myself, is I see myself responding to emails or tweets from thousands of people who have read my words, and my words have encouraged them or inspired them. And so, people reading my words and being inspired or having insight and having my words help them and support them can only happen if I write, right? Like that can only happen if I prioritize what brings me focus, joy, and energy, which is thinking and writing. So, when I think about my schedule and I think about the things that I put ahead of thinking and writing, because no one's going to come and get me and say, Amanda, you're not writing, you're not thinking, you're not taking time to think and write, right? Like, my students aren't going to fuss at me if I don't do that. My kids and my husband aren't going to fuss at me. No one's going to notice that I am not being loyal to myself and giving myself the thing I need the most, right? So I have to hold myself accountable. I have to manage myself by realizing what I need and making sure I make that basic requirement, that basic need, a priority in my life. So I want you to think about the things that energize you and bring you joy. And another thing is, so often the thing that brings us joy, the thing that energizes us, the thing that others thank us for, the thing that's essentially our secret sauce, our magic, the thing that we can really take to the bank in terms of monetizing our personal brand, it's typically so easy for us that we take it for granted, right? So because it's your superpower, it's the thing that you were born to do, it comes naturally to you. It's not something you have to work on, right? Like some people may sit down to write in a journal and have absolutely nothing to say and just sit there and stare at a blank page for an hour. Whereas if I simply make the time to sit down and open the book, the words pour out of me, right? And I can sit there for an hour and just write, stream of consciousness, thoughts, things I noticed, things I remember, things that came back to me, things that I want to address, things that made me mad, right? Things that made me sad, and things I don't want to do again, or things that I'm not really sure why I don't do that anymore. All of that just comes flooding out of me. And I think because it's so effortless, I take it for granted. And it's probably the same thing for you. So whether that is getting the opportunity to sit with people one-on-one and inspire them, or to talk in front of groups and inspire people in groups, if it's giving advice on, the subject of your expertise, or maybe it's inspiring kids or coaching young people or mentoring people who are getting started in your field. If you notice that whenever you do that thing, you feel energized, you feel good, you feel centered, you feel whole, why aren't you doing it more? Why aren't you making it a regular part of your life? So I want you to do a couple of things for me to make this podcast actionable for your life. So number one, I want you to think about your basic requirements. So I've talked a lot about how thinking and writing are basic requirements for me to be my best. And they are not necessarily things that I am paid to do, but they always help me to make more money, right? So I may not be directly paid to think and write, but when I make the time to think and write, I create better and more insightful content that can help people make the choice about whether or not they should work with me, right? And so that brings more clients into my business, more students into my academy. When I make the time to think and write, I uncover insights that are worthy of being published in a book. And, having the insights leads to having a book that you can publish and sell. But it's not immediate, right? It's not like, okay, think and write, here's some money. It's think and write, everything comes out of thinking and writing, and then the money comes, and then the fulfillment comes, and then the happiness comes, and then the energy comes, and then the feeling of I'm working in my purpose comes, right? People often say, think about the things that you would do for free if no one were paying you. And when I'm able to think and write and journal, and especially when I was publishing some of those insights on Facebook, and I think it was mainly Facebook, but I also was publishing them on LinkedIn. If you go to my, I'm sorry, not LinkedIn, Instagram. If you go to my Instagram, which is at Package Your Genius, if you scroll back to 2015, 2016, you'll see the purple boxes. And the purple boxes were those flashes of insight I would get, and I would literally write them in one sitting over like 2 minutes. And those just don't come as often anymore because I'm not taking the time to think and write. And so my point to that was that those purple boxes and me writing and publishing those on Facebook and Instagram, people loved those. And I would always get notes and messages about how those bits of insight were helpful, but I was doing them for free. It didn't bother me to do them for free because it made me feel like I was connecting with the people who needed to hear what I have to say. And that means everything to me, right? So beyond money, beyond being able to pay for anything at all, if I know my words have connected and supported someone and given them hope or helped them gain clarity around a situation, that's priceless to me. And so I want you to think about what is priceless to you, right? What actions evoke the feelings that are priceless to you? What situations evoke the feelings that are priceless to you? What work would you do for free because the reward of that work creates a feeling and sensation that is priceless to you, that makes you feel like you're on this planet for a reason, that makes you feel like you've been sent here to deliver something and you're delivering it. You're working in your purpose. So what is it that makes you feel like that? And then number 2, I want you to assess how often are you actually doing that thing or getting that thing. And so another way to think of this would be, when I asked you, what are the ingredients for you to feel your best or do your best work? That might be vacation time. I have a client who has a very stressful, high-powered job, and she also requires a lot of time to think, but also to recharge her batteries. So she needs time to think, to spend time with her family, and to recharge her batteries because her job is around the clock. And so for her, we instituted a quarterly vacation that is pre-scheduled because that is something she needs to feel her best. She needs to be able to have the chance to recharge her physical and mental battery. She needs to spend uninterrupted quality time with her family, and she needs to have at least 3 days to do this every quarter, right? And so she's scheduling that for the year in advance because she knows that if she doesn't get that, she begins to get tired, frustrated, cranky, angry, irritable, and she's not thinking as clearly because she doesn't have the distance to make some of those high level decisions that her role requires. And so for you, what do you require to be at your very best? It may be exercise. Maybe it's a weekly yoga class to clear your mind. Maybe it's like me and it's writing. Maybe you feel your very best when you get to meet with people in a group setting at least once a week to go over ideas. Maybe you feel your best when you're able to read a really great book once a month because that sets off lots of ideas for you and insights on your work and how you should be doing things better. It gives you things to talk about with your friends, your family, your colleagues, and your clients. Like, what is it that helps you feel your very best? Like, trace back to the origin, the source of when you're feeling energized and in purpose. Like, what is that common denominator? and assess how often are you doing it, getting it, or making it a part of your life. So are you making it a priority, or are you being like I was and leaving it to chance, right? So for years I have known that writing is important to me, that time to think and write is critical for me to feel calm, centered, and to alleviate stress, but to also come up with some of my big ideas, right? So I've known this for years. And yet, because like I said, it's easy for me to get into the flow of writing, when I sit down to do it, I don't do it because I'm like, oh, I'll just do that when I get some time, instead of making the time to do it, because it is the thing that is the linchpin to everything else. It's the key that unlocks everything else, right? So instead of making it a priority because it's the key that unlocks everything else, I've made the mistake of taking it for granted, putting it on the back burner because I figured it would always be there. And so I want you to think about, are you doing that, or are you making what lights you up and what unlocks everything else for you? Are you making that a priority? And number 3, which is pretty simple, I want you to make it a priority, right? So whatever the thing is, and maybe it's a few different things that you feel you need to be your very best self and to show up as your very best you, as a colleague or a companion or a friend or a coach or a consultant or a parent, whatever roles you play. Make it a priority to do the things that help you be your very best. Put them on your calendar and make it a non-negotiable appointment, daily, weekly, or monthly. There are no hard and fast rules to how often you need to do it, but I'm really encouraging you to think through what you need, how often you need it, and put that on the calendar. I don't know why it's so hard for us to prioritize our needs when we know what works for us, right? Like if you look at your life and you think to a time when you were your happiest self, your thinnest self, your most inspired self, your most stress-free self, what were the things that were going on in your life? And if you're not doing some of those things anymore, why not? And how can we incorporate them back if we know what works, right? So that's what I want you to do this week. Number 1, identify your basic requirements, the common denominators to your personal success profile. Number 2, assess how often you are getting or doing that thing, getting that basic requirement for you met. And number 3, make it a priority, whether that's daily, weekly, or monthly, or however often you need to do that thing to feel your very best. Make it a priority and do it. And I want to know how that works for you and what changes do you see in your life. I'm super excited because I'm on a streak of some sort with my journaling, and even I can already tell a difference. As I was journaling today, I was thinking about a few different things that I'm overthinking and that I need to delegate. I have people to delegate these things to, but for whatever reason I'm struggling to hand it off. And so as I was journaling, I got clarity about how I'm holding on to things that I don't need to hold on to. And I really need to focus my energy over here because I'm the only one who can do these things. But this list of things can be simply moved off of my desk, and that lifted a weight for me. And so I'm already seeing the benefits of incorporating my basic requirement back into my life, and it's only been a few days. So I'm excited to see the fruits of that as the year goes on. So what I'm on this week in terms of what I'm reading and watching, I want to share a few things that I've been reading and listening to that I think you might enjoy. So number 1, Malik Teal, who is the CEO and founder of Curlbox, a hair product marketing company, very, very successful, and the host of the My Taught You podcast, published a marathon mindset podcast episode earlier this week, and it's a super long episode. It's like 2.5 hours, but it's so worth it. I listened to it while I was running some errands last week. Truncated. I listened to it and had to stop it and pull it back up, but it was so good. I won't spoil it for you and try to give you a synopsis of what she talked about. But if you are a fan of my leak, you will love the episode, even if you are not a fan of hers or maybe haven't checked out her podcast. I highly recommend this one. It's really, really good. And it's funny. So it's a fun listen. And it's also just a really chock full of wisdom episode. So I really enjoyed that. Number 2, I read an article on Bloomberg called Burned Out Millennials Need Careers, Not Jobs. And I thought that was really interesting because it's talking about the future of work and the future of employment for so many people who are just now becoming employable, and they are, leaving college or entering the workforce. But what will the workforce look like in the next decade or 20 years? Really, really fascinating stuff. I'm also reading a book that kind of ties into some of the themes of that article, and it's called Dark Horse, which you may have seen me post about on social media. It's by a guy by the name of Todd Rose. But the book Dark Horse talks about the rise of individuality in our professions. It's a fascinating book. He talks about how the economy has shifted, and we've watched, the industrial age give birth to the technology age, and now we're going from standardization, so factory workers and people doing these very standardized jobs and creating very standardized products, to this personalized economy where everyone's roles will be individualized, or at least the most fulfilled workers will have jobs and roles that are tailored to their individual passions, talents, skills, and strengths. So it's a fascinating book. I'm not finished with it yet, but I'm really, really enjoying it. And that, again, is Dark Horse by Todd Rose. Another article I read this week was Boyhood at 11 and 12, Navigating a Social System That Prizes Alpha Males Over Quirky Kids. And that was in the Washington Post. That article is a few weeks old, I think. But for me, I actually have a 10 and 11-year-old, so it's very, very timely. And they are very creative kids and very, I think, very kind and loving, perceptive. And I wouldn't necessarily say alpha males. And so that article was very interesting. It's talking about boys that are moving from childhood and boyhood and entering puberty, and really how, when puberty happens, that's the time in life when you separate from your parents. So especially as a boy, you are, I forget the word that therapists use. Is it differentiation or separate? I don't know. But it's a therapy term where you become separate from your family of origin, and you kind of establish your personality and yourself as your own person. But as that happens, so many masculine traits that are prized in the school setting or group settings are those that are focused on, being loud and being, super athletic or super aggressive, and not necessarily everyone fits into that mold. And so how do those boys fare as they enter puberty in middle school and are learning how to assert themselves and position themselves in a social group? So I found that really interesting. And lastly, I listened to an old Package Your Genius episode, to wit, episode 39, where I had interviewed my son Connor on the makings of a childhood that is filled with passions and how you find your passions in childhood. So if you are new to Package Your Genius and you haven't heard that episode, it's really inspiring. It's a real treat. He was 8 years old when we recorded that episode. He's 10 now, and he's continuing to pursue his passions and grow as an artist and now a writer and someone who is putting themselves out there and finding cool things. But it's so cool to hear a conversation around branding and purpose and finding yourself for a child or from a child, because I think it helps all of us reflect back on when we were that age and what were we doing, what were we thinking, and just hearing a child process concepts like branding and purpose and passion and talent helps you remember who you were and who you are, I think, because who you were at 8 is really who you truly are at 37 or 42 or 56 or however old that you are. We are gearing up for a new cohort of Package Your Genius Academy, so I invite you to complete the application that lives on packageyourgeniusacademy.com. I'm excited to welcome a new group of powerful high achievers who need support figuring out how to pull a message around their gifts and then put those messages out into the world in order to connect with the people and audiences that need them the most, and create new revenue streams. As you may have seen, I appeared on Great Day Washington last week, where I was talking about how furloughed employees, which if you are furloughed, you are on my heart and mind right now if you're not being paid, because I understand how tough that can be when you suddenly have lost your income and you need to make money. But I'm hoping that this government shutdown is really opening people's eyes to the fact that you really need to have something else going on, whether you have a full-time job, you're a consultant, you need to have multiple ways to earn income. And so for me, it's not just working with people in the academy, it's also selling books in my product, the branding box. It's also working with people one-on-one when that works out. And so how can you add an additional stream to your mix? That's something we talk about a lot in Package Your Genius Academy. So if you're interested in participating or learning more about the program, submit an application. It's no pressure. We'll have a call and see if it makes sense for you. Copies of Package Your Genius 5 Steps to Build Your Most Powerful Personal Brand are available on Amazon, as well as the companion personal branding workbook. I've seen a lot of social media activity that you guys are getting your workbooks. Many of you who got the book in paperback or on Kindle are now getting access to the workbook. So I hope that, as these winter storms roll in and we have snow days and kind of time that we're not necessarily having to go in and commute and go to work, or we're operating on an abbreviated schedule, I hope that you'll be able to take advantage of both of those resources. So that's Package Your Genius 5 Steps to Build Your Most Powerful Personal Brand and the Package Your Genius Companion Personal Branding Workbook. I'm excited for next week's interview with Miko Whitlock, where we are going to be talking about planning your life's vision, right? Like, he's an expert in prioritization. So we're going to be maintaining our theme of focus in the new year. How do we get focused so that we can bring out our very best selves and live the best version of life as possible? So thank you for listening to this episode of Package Your Genius. I will see you next week.